Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we explore the stories of successful people, get insight and advice from individuals who have accomplished amazing things, and dive deep into understanding ourselves as human beings. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Holland, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to last week's episode 58 with Arash Vasugi, I would highly encourage it because it directly relates to what we're going to talk about today, and that is the book Think and Grow Rich. If you're an entrepreneur or someone trying to accomplish anything meaningful or find your purpose in business, reading is one of the number one things you can do to educate and grow your mind. And I have to give credit where credit is due. I've recently discovered a podcast called Founders Only by David Senra. And I'll put a link into the show notes for this one. And it is an incredible podcast. It's called Founders Only. And essentially what David does is he reads a biography or autobiography every single week. And he is a voracious reader. And then he talks about that biography. So I've just been listening to episode after episode after episode. Now, the book we're going to cover today, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, I haven't heard an episode on David's podcast, Founders Only, like that, because it's not an autobiography or a biography about a particular founder. This book is what I would consider a self-development book. And I recently just finished reading it, and you've probably heard of the book. If you have not read it, go out and buy a copy of the book today. I bought 4 or 5 copies already and given it to people that I think would find particular friends, business partners that I have. I've got a link in my show notes. Again, if you go to that link and you buy it on Amazon, you'll of course be supporting the podcast. But this is one of the best business books I have ever read, hands down. Now, if you ask my family, as they know, I constantly am talking about podcasts where I'm learning and reading because I'm always reading a new book. They'll say, you say that about every single book. And while I do tend to believe so many of the books that are out there are incredible, I will tell you this book is a must for every single entrepreneur, business owner, leader, CEO, executive, quite frankly, anybody, whether personal or professional, that is trying to accomplish something meaningful or with real purpose or find that in their life. And again, we're talking secularly speaking. Before we jump into the book, and I'm going to read excerpts from the book today, and I'm going to do a quick dive into it. This is not by any means meant to be a replacement to reading the book itself. But as I read, I just kept reading faster and faster because what Napoleon Hill talks about, and he's writing this in 1937, and I'll read the prologue so that you can get the idea of what is the book about and why did Napoleon Hill write this. And he was very close with Andrew Carnegie, and we'll get into that in just a bit. But I want to take a step back and say, you have the opportunity in reading, in educating your mind in this day and age like we've never had before. You can read on Kindle. You can read on your computer. I personally am a big fan of paperback books or the hardcover books, and so that's how I choose to read my books. But if you are trying to run a company, if you own a company, if you're trying to start a company, again, and not just company focused, if you're trying to lead a company, anything you're trying to do, if you are not learning from history and educating your mind and learning from their mistakes by reading and understanding or learning from other people's failures, you are likely going to fail yourself. If you're having struggles in your company, for example, let's say whether it's with human resources or hiring or marketing, there are so many people that have run into that exact same problem, and they already figured out why the problem existed and came up with 5 to 10 different solutions. And so if you sit down and if I were to ask you, what are your top 10 books on your reading list? If you don't have an answer to that, you need to have one. Get one. There are so many incredible biographies, autobiographies out there that you can read, and books like this, Think and Grow Rich, that really focus on personal development, control of your mind. Now, if you ask me my top 10 books, number one, hands down, is the Bible. And that is a book that should be the top of every single person's list, period. And it's not a book you read once, it's something I read daily, and everybody should be reading daily. And that's more on the spiritual side, but it's so relevant to so many of the things that this book we're going to talk about today also talks about, but in a more secular form. Then the top book I would say is this Think and Grow Rich. And there are so many books on my list that I have yet to read, and I'll continue reading to the day that I die. So find those books, whether they're industry specific books for you, whether you need, right now you're having some issue in your life with maybe mental health, or you're not sure how to market your company. There are books out there that you can read. And anybody, if you look at anybody who has been wildly successful, and I'm going to define success in this sentence primarily financially speaking, that is by no means the definition of success, my definition of success, nor does it necessarily should be your definition of success, but that's simply money or net worth is kind of how we measure the game. So I'm just going to use that definition in this particular case. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, any of them, Sam Zell, they were voracious readers, and they read and they read and they read, and their libraries were stacked with books. And that's not by mistake. And it's not like they got rich and then started to read. They were reading all along and educating their mind, and that is undoubtedly one of the reasons to their success. In my opinion, every business book you read, whether it's a biography, autobiography, a personal development book like this, takes, again, this is my estimate, other people may have estimates, for every book you read, you can get the same amount of wisdom and knowledge from that book as you may acquire in half a year of running your own business. And if I could go back to the earlier days of my entrepreneurial career and recognize that so many of the mistakes that I made, I could have avoided, and I could have avoided the pain and the suffering of those mistakes by simply being a more avid reader and learning from those who came before me and already went through the same thing, I wish I would have had someone tell me that back then. So if I could have read a book and gotten half of a year of experience, now it's not experience in the sense of the actual going through the process, which you're always going to do, and reading will never replace actually putting in the work and putting in the time. But what it can do is it can add more efficiency, and you can get to where you want to go faster by learning from other people's mistakes. So let's dive into the book, Think and Grow Rich. I can't express how I started the book. I finished the book. I'm going to restart the book. And this is one that you need to read 3, 4, 5 times. And Napoleon Hill even encourages you to do so because the topics are so meaty and so applicable to so many aspects of life. Let's dive in. I'm going to start with the prologue or the introduction so that you can get a feel for why this book was written. And essentially, what Napoleon Hill does is he goes through the 13 steps required for riches. And those chapters are enumerated as such. And he has a few extra ones. So let me just read each one of the steps to riches and the chapters here. And again, buy the book, click on the link in the show notes, start reading it. When you get into it, you won't be able to put it down. So chapter 1 is the power of thought. And he's simply talking about why thought is really the basis of all poverty and riches. One of his favorite quotes in the whole book that basically sums up the book really well is both poverty and riches are the offspring of thought. And we'll dive more deeply into what does that exactly mean. Poverty and riches are both the offspring of thought. So chapter 1, the power of thought, chapter 2, and this is where we get into the first step to riches, desire, the starting point of all achievement. Chapter 3, faith, visualizing and believing in the attainment of desire. That's step number 2 to riches. Chapter 4, autosuggestion. the medium for influencing the subconscious mind, which is the third step to riches. Chapter 5, specialized knowledge, personalized experiences or observations, the fourth step to riches. And if some of these words, for example, chapter 4, autosuggestion, you're like, what is autosuggestion? He describes every single one of these aspects in complete detail so that by the end of the chapter, you know exactly what he's doing. And more importantly, he links all of these chapters together. And he's done such a good job of organizing the book in such a manner that it's a well logically thought out progression, and one chapter builds upon the other chapter. Chapter 6, imagination, the workshop of the mind, the fifth step to riches, imagination, that'll be important. Chapter 7, organized planning, the crystallization of desire into action, the sixth step to riches. Chapter 8, decision, the mastery of procrastination, and this is one that is so relevant today, decision. That's the seventh step to riches. Chapter 9, persistence, the sustained effort necessary to induce faith, the eighth step to riches. I'm going to speed up and go through this a little bit more quickly because we're going to talk briefly, not about all of these because I want you to read the book, but I'm going to go through the most important, or what I believe some of the most prominent parts of the book are, and we'll talk about the application of them. Chapter 10, power of the mind, power of the mastermind, the driving force, the ninth step to riches. Chapter 11, the mystery of sex transmutation. Really interesting chapter and a very interesting take he has on desire. I'm not going to cover a lot of it in the podcast today because it's one of those chapters that you have to read in its entirety to better understand what is he talking about, the mystery of sex transmutation. What does that even mean? That's the 10th step to riches. Chapter 12, the subconscious mind, the connecting link, the 11th step to riches. Chapter 13, the brain, a broadcasting and receiving station for thought, the 12th step to riches. And I want to highlight between chapter 12, the connecting link is the subconscious mind, and the broadcasting and receiving station for the subconscious mind is the brain. Chapter 14, the sixth sense, the door to the temple of wisdom. That's one of my favorite chapters to talk about the sixth sense. And that's the final, the 13th step to riches. And then he has two more chapters. Chapter 15, how to outwit the six ghosts of fear. I'm going to spend a lot of time on that chapter because I've talked with so many entrepreneurs. And the number one reason they see people not pursue their dreams is because of fear. And so he talks about the top six fears and talks about how you can really overcome them. And chapter 16, the devil's workshop, which is he labels the seventh basic evil. Let's jump into the preface, the prologue, the introduction here, so you can get an idea of what is the basis of this book, where did it come from. Every chapter of this book, so this is written by Napoleon Hill himself, every chapter of this book mentions the money-making secret that has made fortunes for more than 500 exceedingly wealthy people whom I carefully analyzed over a long period of years. That's such an important highlight that I want to focus on there. Napoleon Hill isn't just making this up, or this is not some self help book that is by some opinion of an individual. He studied for more than 20 years some of the most successful people at the time. And you got to remember, this was written in 1937. This book was updated, and there's a few italicized areas where the individual that kind of adds it, I don't remember who that is. This is the now revised and updated for the 21st century. Oh, revised and expanded by Dr. Arthur R. Pell. So he adds some more 21st century relevant additions to this book in italics. But this was written in 1937. And so that's right around the time, we had just experienced the Industrial Revolution in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. So he's studying, he'll talk about the people that he studies here. We're talking about mega billionaires. So he didn't just pull these thoughts from this book out of thin air. As a matter of fact, why did he decide to start studying the wealthy individuals that he studied for this book? He goes on to talk about that. The secret was brought to my attention more than a quarter of a century ago by Andrew Carnegie. Again, he's writing this in 1937. So 25 years earlier, Andrew Carnegie came to Napoleon Hill, and He continues, the canny, lovable old Scotsman carelessly tossed it into my mind when I was but a boy. Then he sat back in his chair with a merry twinkle in his eyes and watched carefully to see if I had brains enough to understand the full significance of what he had said to me. So think about this. Napoleon Hill is a boy. Andrew Carnegie, one of the wealthiest men at that point, 1937 minus 1925. So you're looking in 1908, 1906, whatever that math comes out to be. He's talking to Napoleon Hill, and he's telling him about this idea of studying successful individuals to find the money-making secret that has made fortunes. Napoleon goes on to say, when he saw that I had grasped the idea, he asked if I would be willing to spend 20 years or more preparing myself to take it to the world, to men and women who, without the secret, the money making secret that he shares throughout this entire book, might go through life as failures. I said I would, and with Mr. Carnegie's cooperation, I have kept my promise. So this book is the very product of what the whole thing talks about, a thought in Andrew Carnegie's mind telling Napoleon Hill as a boy, are you willing to study the most successful people? And I'm sure Andrew Carnegie funded a lot of this, the whole thing, so that Napoleon Hill could do it. And he thought about it, and Napoleon Hill took him up on that. And this book is the result of all of his analysis over that more than 20-year period. He goes on to talk about that. This book contains the secret, which has been put to a practical test by thousands of people from almost every walk of life. I've read tons of self-help books. One of the reasons this, out of all the ones I've read, is top of the list is because it is from an actual experiment and analysis is probably a better word. A practical test by thousands of people from almost every walk of life. It was Mr. Carnegie's idea that the magic formula, which gave him a stupendous fortune, ought to be placed within reach of people who do not have time to investigate how people make money. Most of us are trying to run a business, grow a business in the pursuit of making money. Again, money does not bring happiness. I've interviewed tons of entrepreneurs that have made that very clear. A certain point does. And he talks a lot about in this book the idea of money and if that's your ultimate goal versus having a purpose. But in this particular scenario, as I said earlier, we're going to use that as a measuring tool. So, Mr. Carnegie's idea that the magic formula which gave him a stupendous fortune ought to be placed within reach of people who do not have time to investigate how people make money. He hoped that I might test and demonstrate the soundness of the formula through the experience of men and women in every calling. He believed, again, talking about Andrew Carnegie, he believed the formula should be taught in all schools and colleges and expressed the opinion that if it were properly taught, it would so revolutionize the entire educational system that the time spent in school could be reduced to less than half. After reading this book and rereading this introduction and thinking about that statement, I couldn't agree with it more. I'm going to reread that statement. And our society, this should be required reading in every single education public school in the United States, quite frankly, across the world. And it's not. Instead, we're reading some of this other garbage that I won't even, this fluffy language arts, Romeo and Juliet, and yada, yada, yada. And a lot of people are going to be haters and say, well, here's the reality. This book will get you far more in life than any of those artistic, whatever that fluffy language that Shakespeare uses. I want to read that statement. He believed the formula that is outlined in this book should be taught in all schools and colleges and expressed the opinion that if it were properly taught, it would so revolutionize the entire educational system that the time spent in school could be reduced to less than half. Think about that. We could cut the educational system and thereby the costs, which are extremely expensive, by half if we taught just the principles in this book. And having read it and reread it or parts of it, again, I'm going to be going on it my second time, there's no doubt in my mind that's true. I'm going to continue with this prologue, and then we're going to jump into some of the more pertinent parts of the book that I think are relevant for us to discuss. His experience with Charles M. Schwab See page 58. This is Andrew Carnegie. When he says his, Napoleon Hill is talking about Andrew Carnegie. His experience with Charles M. Schwab, see page 58, and other young men of Mr. Schwab's type convinced Mr. Carnegie that much of what is taught in schools is of no value whatsoever in connection with the business of earning a living or accumulating riches. He arrived at this decision having taken into his business one young man after another, many with little schooling, and developed in them rare leadership by coaching them in the use of this formula. Moreover, his coaching made fortunes for every one of them who followed his instructions. Think about that. This is back in 1937. Napoleon is writing this. How many of us think that our kids go through an education system and they come out and they don't even know the basics of life? How to balance a checkbook, how to manage a bank account, how to do any of the things that are actually required to earn a living and accumulate riches. I bet if you polled the country, more than 75% would say, yeah, our education system is failing our children because it's not giving them the very fundamental basics to even set them up for success. This is Andrew Carnegie identifying this back in 1937, probably closer to the 1920s because Napoleon is writing this in 1937. We've had this information in our society for going on almost 100 years, and we've done nothing in our system to change. Very sad, and why this book is so important. In the chapter on faith, you will read the astounding story of how the formula was applied to the organization of the giant United States Steel Corporation. It was conceived and carried out by one of the young men through whom Mr. Carnegie proved that his formula will work for all who are ready for it. This single application of the secret by that young man, Charles M. Schwab, made him a huge fortune in both money and opportunity. Roughly speaking, this particular application of the formula was worth $600 million. Spoken in another way, the application of the formula that Napoleon Hill outlines in this book after studying thousands and thousands of people who have tried it, and particularly studying very successful people who actually utilized the formula and applied it and became wildly wealthy, was utilized by Charles M. Schwab, and it's all written in this book. These facts, and they are facts well known to almost everyone who knew Mr. Carnegie, give you a fair idea of what the reading of this book may bring to you, provided you know what you want. And he talks about that in this book, and we'll talk about it in more detail. Even before it had undergone 20 years of practical testing, the secret was passed on to more than 100,000 men and women who have used it for their personal benefit, as Mr. Carnegie planned that they should. Some have made fortunes with it, others have used it successfully in creating harmony in their homes. My point being, this is not just about accumulating riches, but the thoughts and the principles that this book outlines can be utilized not only to create fortunes, but others have used it to successfully create harmony in their homes, in their personal life. The secret to which I refer has been mentioned no fewer than 100 times throughout this book. So in this introduction, he gives kind of a quizzical or an enigma idea of what is this money-making secret that I'm going to be talking about. And he says, you may discover it in the first chapter, you may not discover it until the last chapter. But he says, this secret to which I refer has been mentioned no fewer than 100 times throughout this book. It has not been directly named, for it seems to work more successfully when it is merely uncovered and left in sight, where those who are ready and searching for it may pick it up. That is why Mr. Carnegie tossed it to me so quietly without giving me its specific name. If you are ready to put it to use, you will recognize this secret at least once in every chapter. I wish I could tell you how you will know if you are ready, but that would deprive you of much of the benefit you will receive when you make the discovery in your own way. I'm going to stop reading the prologue there. I want to jump into basically the ending of what he says in this introduction, and then we're going to get into the some of the meat of the books where I think are the most prominent parts that we can discuss in more detail. As a final word of preparation, may I offer one brief suggestion that may provide a clue to recognizing the Carnegie secret. It is this: all achievement, all earned riches have their beginning in an idea. I'm going to reread that. All achievement, all earned riches have their beginning in an idea. Now, he just got done telling us he doesn't write this secret directly on the page. And while that particular line refers to the secret, that what he's saying, it needs to be more, it's explained much better in the book by what does he mean by that. We've all heard that. Steve Jobs had an idea. Bill Gates had an idea. Warren Buffett had an idea. So all achievement, all earned riches have their beginning in an idea. If that was the only basis of this book, which it is a key principle of the book, but he describes that in far greater detail to flush that out so that by the end of the book, you'll understand why that sentence, why that concept is so key to the secret formula to accumulating riches or creating harmony in your homes. I'm going to go on and let's jump right into chapter 2. So, chapter 2 is, as I said at the beginning, the first chapter. It's desire, the starting point of all achievement, the first step to riches. One of the things this book does, and it constantly refers to this next section that I'm going to read through, because it is so key in actually applying the secret formula that Napoleon talks about. So I'm going to read this so that you can write it down and you can practice it, and the book refers to it throughout. So you want to do something. Let's say it's interesting because when I got done with the podcast with Arash last week, episode 58, we were talking about the podcast, and I said my ultimate goal is to have Elon Musk, the richest man in the world at present, on my podcast. And I said, there's no doubt in my mind I will have Elon Musk on my podcast, 100%. It's a matter of what are the steps for me to take? And you know what he recommended to me? And so many of the things that he said are directly related to what this book it talks about. He said, here's what I would do, Andrew. I would find a picture of Elon Musk, find a picture of you, and frame it and put it on your desk. So every single day when you come into the office, you will see you and Elon Musk as if it had already happened, as if he was an old pal or an old friend. And he went on to continue to talk about the importance of, in your mind, believing that it has happened or acting as if it has already happened. And it got me thinking, and I'm a big believer, and this is what so much of this book is about. And it's why why Napoleon Hill says, both poverty and riches are the offspring of thought. And that was essentially Arash's point. If you believe it to be true, not just say it, but if you believe it and you make that focus and you visualize it, it will come true. So I'm going to talk about the 6 steps that are part of the secret formula for you to accomplish what it is you're trying to accomplish. And remember what we just talked about in the prologue, in the introduction. He said, I'm going to give you the secret formula, but you have to know what you want. So if you don't know what you want yet, none of this is going to matter. You have to figure out what you want. So the method by which desire for riches can be transmuted into its financial equivalent. I want to read that again because he talks about that frequently throughout the book. And because this is written in 1937, I love the way it's written. He's very clear, he's very precise in his thoughts, and he uses some, I won't say big words, but very specific words, such that there can be no semantical confusion about what he's trying to say. In a lot of books in this day and age, it has to be so dubbed down because our vocabulary, our vernacular is so lazy, and none of us are very well educated in so many words that back then were very common. So he uses the power of the English language to say exactly what he means. And sometimes for us in this day and age, and for me, I have to reread a few of his sentences to say, okay, that's written in 1937. What does that mean? I need to focus on that. This is one of those things, and it's why I'm pointing it out. The method by which desire, wanting something for riches, can be turned into transmuted into its financial equivalent. Essentially, what he's saying is, how can you take what's in your mind and what you really want and turn it into the physical reality of its financial equivalent? In this scenario, accumulating wealth is net worth, consists of 6 definite practical steps. 6, that's it. And that's what we're going to talk about. How? Everybody always says, well, I want to be an entrepreneur or a business owner, but I don't know what business to start. I have this idea. Okay, you know what you want. You have an idea. How do you turn it into its financial equivalent? He tells us right here, chapter 2 of the book, The First Step to Riches. So let's read through it. Number 1, fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. So he says you need to know what you want. So he's going to use a particular amount of money in his example, in this step process, but it can be anything. Read another way, fix in your mind the exact thing you want to accomplish, put in different words. So I'm going to read it exactly as he's written it. Fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. It is not sufficient merely to say, I want plenty of money. Be definite as to the amount. There is a psychological reason for definiteness, which will be described in a subsequent chapter. What he's saying, everybody says, oh, how much money do you want? Oh, I want a lot. No. He's saying in order for this secret formula to work and for these 6 steps to work, you have to have a defined amount of money. Not just because you need a goal that you can set, but there is a psychological reason, which he discusses later in the book, for having a definite in that amount, a defined amount. Step number 2, determine exactly what you intend to give in return for the money you desire. In parentheses, he says, there is no such reality as something for nothing. Focus on that. Anybody who says they want to accomplish X, Y, or Z oftentimes speaks words only. And we all have friends, and perhaps if we look inwardly, we say one thing, but our actions speak very differently. That is to say, if you want something, you will have to give up something else because you cannot get something for nothing. And that is the key point of step number 2. Determine exactly what you intend to give in return for the money you desire. There is no such reality as something for nothing. So many people or self-help gurus out there say you can have it all. Wrong. Not true. He says right here, think about what you want. In this particular scenario, you've defined the amount of money you want. Let's say it's $10,000. You've defined that reason for a very important purpose that he's going to define later. Now determine, what are you willing to give up for that $10,000? If you say to yourself, well, I'm not going to have to give up anything, well, you failed. You're not following the steps and you don't know the basis of economic reality, time, money, all of the different opportunity costs, because every single decision has an opportunity cost to it. So that's exactly what he's saying right here. And describe exactly what you intend to give in return for the money you desire, because there's no such reality as something for nothing. Step number 3, establish a definite date when you intend to possess the money you desire. Very important. And he's holding your feet to the fire. And when I read this book, I have a note card that sits right by my chair near my bed that I have outlined each one of these 6 things. And I am following this principle since I've read the book, or these steps, and we'll continue reading through the steps. So establish a definite date when you intend to possess the money you desire. Step number 4, create a definite plan for carrying out your desire and begin at once, whether you are ready or not to put this plan into action. It's not just good enough to have a thought. You need to have a defined thought. And then you need to talk about, what are you willing to give up to accomplish this defined, in this case, amount, or what you're trying to accomplish. And then you need to create, step number 4, a definite plan for carrying out your desire and begin at once, whether you are ready or not to put this plan into action. So many people that I have talked to who are in the corporate world, who want to be an entrepreneur, who want to start their own business, say, I want this. But they say they're not ready. But they have no plan. And he says, number 1, you've got to create a plan for carrying out your desire. And you have to begin at once, whether you are ready or not, to put this plan into action. Stop using the excuse that I am not ready. We all use it, and is merely a manner of procrastination and a basic definition of indecision, which he talks about later in the book, is destructive to everything you are trying to accomplish. Indecision is something that plagues our society day in and day out, and it's something that will kill your ability to be successful faster than anything else. Step number 5, write out a clear, concise statement of the amount of money you intend to acquire. Name the time limit for its acquisition, state what you intend to give in return for the money, and describe clearly the plan through which you intend to accumulate it. So, number 1, 2, 3, 4, he basically says in step number 5, all right, write all of those things out. Write out a clear, concise statement of the amount of money you intend to acquire, name the time limit for its acquisition, state what you intend to give in return for the money, and describe clearly the plan through which you intend to accumulate it. And writing it out, if you look at all the studies, has an incredibly powerful impact on the likelihood of something actually coming to fruition. It's not good enough just to think about these things in your mind. He's saying, write it out on a piece of paper, on a note card, so it is etched for all time to see this is what you intend to accomplish. This is what you intend to give up to accomplish that. And this is the date by which you intend to accomplish it. And this is how you're going to accomplish it. How many of us in our lives have people who say they want to do something and they have done none of those things? They haven't clearly defined what they want. They haven't clearly defined a definite date by which they want to accomplish what they want or achieve what they want. They have not even thought about the sacrifices that they're going to have to give up to accomplish this said desire. And more importantly, or as importantly, they haven't even put together a plan to determine how they're going to accomplish what they want, let alone written it all out. So ask yourself, is this you? Are you sitting there stuck in neutral somewhere at some point in your life, regardless of what you're trying to achieve, whether you're trying to be a star Olympic athlete, whether you're trying to start a business or an entrepreneur, whether you're trying to start a successful family, whether you're trying to start a nonprofit to help a particular cause that is particularly meaningful for you? Has this happened to you? Have you followed these steps? Have you actually put your desires into actions? Step number 6 is one of the probably the most important step out of all of these. Of course, you can't have step number 6 if you haven't done the previous steps, but it is something you cannot forget. Step number 6 is this: read your statement aloud twice daily, once just before retiring at night and once after rising in the morning. As you read, and this is what Arash was telling me, and it was so uncanny that the next week, after we had recorded that podcast, I found this book, bought the book, and of course I had heard it, but I had never read it. And all of these principles that he was saying basically were here on the paper I was reading. As you read, see and feel and believe yourself already in possession of the money. I'm going to reread step number 6. Read your written statement aloud twice daily. That's very important. Not in your mind, not once, twice. Read your statement, your written statement aloud twice daily. Once just before retiring at night and once after rising in the morning. And he has this in all capital letters. As you read, see and feel and believe yourself already in possession of the money. That is such an important aspect of this entire book and the entire determination of an individual's ability to be successful. Again, we're talking secularly speaking. As I've indicated in the past, I am a Christian, and there is nothing more important than knowing what will happen to you when you die. If you haven't figured that out, everything we're talking about is meaningless garbage. So set this book aside, set every other book aside that you're reading, and start reading the Bible. But if you already have salvation, and now, again, the most important thing in the world, and if you read my card that I've written, I talk about, I'm not going to tell you the amount, I'm not going to tell you the date, but what I will tell you is I have, as step number 2, what do you intend to give in return for the money you desire? I will give up everything but my faith, family, health, and moral values to accomplish this. I'm going to say that again because in this day and age, the desire to accumulate riches is often done at the expense of things that should never be given up. My statement on my note card, if you went to my house and read it, for step number 2 says, I will give up everything but my faith, family, health, and morals to accomplish this goal. If you have a goal and you're willing to sacrifice your very moral principles or values, it's not worth it. Get rid of it. If you have a goal and you're willing to sacrifice your family for money, get rid of it. Money isn't worth it. If you have a goal and you have faith, and as I just said, if you don't have that, all of this is meaningless, but you have faith, and you're willing to give up the only thing that matters in this world, namely salvation and where you're going to go when you die, is it really worth it for the 80 or 90 years that we live on this life to sacrifice eternity? No. And faith and moral values go hand in hand. But I put moral values because setting aside the religious side, even in our own society, look at the very social righteousness that we are lacking and why crime. We could talk about all the political issues of this day and age and the things that are wrong with society. And I don't go down this path from a negative perspective, and the book talks about the power of the mind. I talk about this because we have to be realistic. We have to actually confront problems when there are problems and actually make adjustments or find solutions. So, my point in saying moral values separate from faith is because just how we treat one another, do unto others as you would like to do unto yourself. If you are willing to sacrifice this for some meaningless earthly desire or goal that you have, I feel very sorry for you. So, on that card, I hope that in step number 2, you have down whatever your goal is, whenever the date is that you have, that you aren't willing to sacrifice your faith, family, health, and moral values. And health is so important. And as we continue to age as humans, you recognize that. So, jumping back to step number 6, I had a sidebar there. But as you read, see, and feel, and believe yourself, and as you read, see, and feel, and believe yourself already in possession of the money. I come across lots of people, and this happens to be myself, that say they want something. They say it. Their actions say something differently. But even if their actions are, from a outsider's perspective, aligned with what they say they want to accomplish, when they say it, I can tell like that whether they actually believe it. And I've always said this to everybody. If you say you want something, but you don't actually believe it, you don't have the confidence or the true belief in your subconscious mind that it will happen, it will not happen. And in this day and age, in our society, that concept of confidence is so lacking. And it's why I think this book must be required in every single educational facility, grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the United States, but quite frankly, across the world. Because that lack of confidence, that lack of true belief in actually thinking you can accomplish what you want. And again, both poverty and riches are the offspring of thought. So many people say they want something, but you can tell they don't believe it. And so if you're lying to yourself, why do you think anybody else is going to believe it or help you support it? And so when I talk about my goal for the podcast of getting Elon Musk on the podcast, I have zero doubt it will happen. None. And anybody who asks me what is my goal, again, setting aside anything financially related to the podcast, just the enjoyment of what I'm doing and kind of what is that goal I want to achieve, I know I'll have Elon Musk. There's zero doubt in my mind. And I mean, anybody who hears me say that, they know when I say it, I actually believe it. Now, they might think I'm crazy and they might think I'm stupid. I don't care. I know it can happen and I know it will happen if you put your mind to it. But step number 1 is you actually have to believe that which you want to accomplish is achievable and that you will achieve it. And this is why, and he goes on through the rest of the book, and I've got so many different things I want to talk about, but this podcast would go on for 4 or 5 hours if I tried to get through all of this. So we're not going to be able to cover everything that I want. But that's why he says, read your statement aloud twice daily, once just before retiring at night and once after rising in the morning. And in all caps, he says, as you read, see, and feel, and believe yourself already in possession of the money. He talks about in the book why these 6 steps, step number 6 is so important. And he checks up on you and says, have you been doing these 6 steps every single day, twice, reading it aloud as I've instructed you to do? That is so important because he understands just because you want something, that doesn't mean overnight you're going to believe it. But he talks about the power of the mind, and he talks about the importance of the subconscious mind. The one, as we described in the chapter, the subconscious, chapter 12, mind, the subconscious mind, the connecting link. It starts there. It's the 11th step to riches. Your subconscious mind has a tremendous impact on the outward mind, your actual thoughts, whether you realize it or not, and ultimately what you can accomplish. And this is why he says, as you read, you have to see, you have to feel, and you have to believe yourself already in possession of the money. And this is why Arash told me, you put a picture with Elon next to you and you visualize it every single day as if it had already happened, because that will impact the subconscious mind. And eventually, if you don't believe it can happen, I happen to already know it will happen for me. But if you don't believe, and even if you do, as in my circumstances, it continues to reaffirm in your subconscious mind, the mind that we're not necessarily thinking about or capable of thinking about. And that influence on the subconscious mind has a direct result on your actual thoughts and a direct result on your actual accomplishments, hands down. And so much of this book is about that exact thing: power of the mind and how important it is. And I know there are so many people out there who think all of this is hogwash and they will never accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish because of that very disbelief in understanding the power of the mind. And at the beginning, when I talked about the most important book in the world, the Bible, and I said there are a lot of correlations to this book and what this book is talking about more in a secular context. And he stays away from religion in this book, and he deliberately does so, and he talks about that. He calls God infinite intelligence throughout the book. But the whole book, the premise of the book, starts with your thought process. And that is why it is the offspring of both poverty and riches. If you want riches and truly believe it, you will have them. If you don't, and he talks about this in another part of the book, you need to fill that void. And if you are filling that, you are not actively filling that void with what you want to accomplish, human nature, society writ large will fill that void for you, and it will be for poverty and sadness and negativity. So you have to, that is the default of what happens into our subconscious mind. But getting back, what does the Bible say? Faith can move mountains. That's how powerful what God has created in our minds, the subconscious mind. Faith can move mountains. And that's exactly what this book is talking about, the power, again, in a secular version. So I'm taking that Bible passage out of context a little bit, but the point being is what God has given us up here is more powerful than we can ever imagine. And we never use but even 1% of it because we don't have faith. I'm going to move on to some of the more pertinent parts. Again, I would like to cover all of these things, but we're not going to have the time in today's podcast, which means go to the show notes, click on the book. You'll be supporting the podcast at the same time as you're getting probably one of the best self-help or personalization or personal development books you will ever read, bar none, and I've read tons of them. Staying in chapter 2, one must realize that all who have accumulated great fortunes first did a certain amount of dreaming. How many entrepreneurs have you listened to? And again, I listen to Founders Only. If you have not started listening to it, please go to it. I don't know David Senra. He doesn't know me from Adam, but it is the best podcast I have ever listened to as it directly relates to understanding and learning from those who have come before us, their biographies and their autobiographies. And that's all he talks about. And I just listen to episode after episode. And why? Because one must realize that all who have accumulated great fortunes first did a certain amount of dreaming. And in every single one of those podcasts, when you talk about that David does on Founders Only, when you listen to the story, whether they've written themselves as an autobiography or someone else is writing it about them as a biography, it all started with a dream. Steve Jobs, Warren Buffett, he goes back to David Ogilvy, all of them. There's so many going in my mind, I can't even tell you all the different podcasts that I just happen to be listening to the Steve Jobs one right now, and he covers a book multiple times. But all of them had something very common at the beginning. They dreamt something, but they actually believed it in spite of what the rest of the world was telling them. And everybody, for the most part, was telling them, you're an idiot, it can't be done, you're crazy. But they didn't care. They had a level of self-confidence and belief that it could actually be accomplished, and sure as heck, it was accomplished. I'm going to read this line and then we'll move on. Again, one must realize that all who have accumulated great fortunes first did a certain amount of dreaming, hoping, wishing, desiring, and planning before they acquired money. They dreamt it, they hoped for it, they wished for it, they desired it, and they planned for it before they acquired money. So if you want to accomplish something, stop just saying it. Stop just putting something out there and wasting your own time and lying to yourself. If you actually want to accomplish it, follow the six steps we just went through. And if you don't believe you can accomplish it, but you do want to accomplish it, and he talks about that in the book, he says, I recognize this isn't going to happen overnight. And it's why he encourages you to read your statement aloud twice daily, once upon rising, once upon going right before bed, and then visualize yourself. In his particular case, he talks about particular amount of money, but whatever your goal is, visualize, read, see, and believe that that goal you want to accomplish has already happened. Moving on to the next chapter, we talk about, I want to go through a few quotes on faith. And again, this is chapter 3. So it's the next chapter, the second step to riches. And he says, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the subconscious mind will translate a thought impulse of a negative or destructive nature into its physical equivalent just as readily as it will act upon thought impulses of a positive or constructive nature. I'm going to reread that again because it's a very wordy statement, but a very powerful statement. The subconscious mind will translate a thought impulse of a negative or destructive nature into its physical equivalent. What is he saying by that? Your subconscious mind will take your negative thoughts and make it become reality. Plain and simple. He goes on in that same statement that I've read already, just as readily as it will act upon thought impulses of a positive or constructive nature. So, if you have positive, constructive thoughts, the subconscious mind will translate that into its physical equivalent. In today's words, that means what you think will be turned into reality, whether it's negative or whether it's positive. The subconscious mind does not delineate between a positive thought or a negative thought. What he talks about in the book is it will naturally fill your subconscious mind with negative, destructive thoughts if you don't actively bring in positive, constructive thoughts. So if you are sitting back and you are letting others have control of your mind, or you are letting society have control of your mind as it relates to whatever particular goal you are trying to accomplish, you can bet that the only type of thoughts, it's sinful human nature, that will come into your mind are negative, self-destructive thoughts. And your subconscious mind will ensure that those negative thoughts are turned into its physical equivalent, meaning reality, a sad life, a poverty-stricken life, not being happy, quote unquote, on a day-to-day basis. So if you want to prevent that, you have to have control over your subconscious mind. And he talks throughout this whole book, well, it's the subconscious mind, Andrew. How do you have control? That's why he has those 6 steps, because he recognizes that to get to your subconscious mind, there are certain things that we have to do as human beings so that we can start this process of turning a desire and a wish and a dream into its physical equivalent, namely into reality. I'm going to go on to read in this chapter on faith, which is the second step to riches. This is an appropriate place at which to suggest again that you may benefit by passing on to your subconscious mind any desire that you wish translated into its physical or monetary equivalent in a state of expectancy or belief that the transmutation will actually take place. Your belief or faith is the element that determines the action of your subconscious mind. I'm going to read that sentence again because it is such a powerful statement. This is an appropriate place at which to suggest again that you may benefit by passing on to your subconscious mind any desire that you wish translated into its physical or monetary equivalent. Put in other ways, this is where he's talking about you are going to benefit onto your subconscious mind anything that you want to accomplish. If you, in so doing, if that positive thought is done in a state of expectancy or belief, you actually believe that it's going to happen, in a state of expectancy or belief that the transmutation will actually take place. Your belief or faith, key, huge, is the element that determines the action of your subconscious mind. So you may bring positive thoughts into your mind, but if you don't have a state, as he described it, of expectancy or belief, you will not, your subconscious mind will not turn it into its physical equivalent, because your belief or faith is the element that determines the action of your subconscious mind. There is nothing to hinder you from deceiving your subconscious mind when giving it instructions through autosuggestion. As he talks about, he deceived his son's subconscious mind. His son was born blind, and his son so badly desired to see, and ultimately did. And he talks about in this chapter 2 that whole story. It's a fascinating one, not one we're going to go through, but when you read the book, it just proves so many of the points that he has. To make this deceit more realistic, he's talking about the deceit, telling your subconscious mind that perhaps right now doesn't believe it's going to happen, but there is nothing to hinder you from deceiving your subconscious mind when giving it instructions through auto suggestion. Namely, you can get your subconscious mind to believe it. You may have to deceive it for a while. So he says, to make this deceit more realistic, conduct yourself just as you would if you are already in possession of the material thing which you are demanding when you call upon your subconscious mind. Why does he tell you to read that statement out loud twice daily? And when you do so, see and feel and believe that you are already in possession of the monetary equivalent you have determined, or you have accomplished the goal that you are looking to accomplish. Because in order to deceive your subconscious mind, you must conduct yourself just as you would if you were already in possession of the material thing which you are demanding. I mean, I could just go on with so many things in this book. I'm going to read one more here in the chapter of faith, and then I'm going to jump to the end on fear, because I think it is one of the most important topics in any person's goal of trying to accomplish something meaningful, or finding their secular purpose in life, because fear is often the number one thing that holds all of us back. So I don't want to skip that. I'm going to conclude here with something he says. A mind dominated by positive emotions becomes a favorable abode for the state of mind known as faith. A mind so dominated by this faith that he's talking about, a mind so dominated may, at will, give the subconscious mind instructions which it will accept and act upon immediately. How do we access the subconscious mind? Yes, perhaps for a time we have to deceive it by believing we are already in possession of the material or the outcome that we already want. We have to see, feel, believe that it is already accomplished. And when you have done that, that mind dominated by positive emotions becomes a favorable abode for the state of mind known as faith. And a mind that is dominated as such has this faith, he's saying, a mind that has faith will be able to, at will, access. He doesn't use that word, but I'm using that word. He says, give the subconscious mind instructions. I say, access the subconscious mind and basically tell it what you want it to do, which it will then accept and act upon immediately. We already discussed that the subconscious mind will translate to your conscious mind, which will ultimately translate into actual reality. And if you can't find a way, or if you don't go through these principles to control the subconscious mind, you're in trouble. He tells us, if you can get to this point that he's talking about, which anybody can, and you find that mind of faith, you will be able to enact your will upon your subconscious mind, which in turn we know will already produce the physical equivalent of the thoughts that are in the subconscious mind, whether they be poverty or riches. And your ability to access your subconscious mind, train your subconscious mind, as he describes, which I'm still working on. I think it's always a work in progress, but you get better and better with practice, is one of the most powerful determinants of your ability to be successful when you can call your subconscious mind at command. As if you are a commander in an army telling troops to move forth and they move forth. That's what you need to get to for your subconscious mind. And then it will accept it immediately and act upon it, meaning turn it into reality. As you can see, I've got a million different outlines in this book that I want to talk about, but unfortunately, we're just not going to be able to go through all of them on this podcast. Get the book. It will be one of the best reads. And it is, if you aren't used to this type of language, it will be a little bit of a challenge. But as I've done in this podcast today, if there's something you're like, I don't understand what that means, reach out to me. Hit me up on Twitter, send me a tweet, and we can talk about it. I love getting responses and thoughts from you. There are some things in this book, it's very meaty. It's written in 1937, so the vocation or the vernacular is a little bit different of the way that they use things, but he is very clear, very precise throughout every single sentence in the book of what he means, and it is not to be mistaken. But if it's hard for you to read when you're going through it, reach out to me, read, reread again. I promise you that if you give it the time and attention that you should give it, as Carnegie said, if we taught this book in our educational facilities, we could cut our public education system in half. And we're already doing a failing, miserable job for the majority of our kids at even getting them through high school or college with the basic requirement foundation to accumulate or earn a living or accumulate the riches that they desire, or quite frankly, accomplish any goal. And that's never been more true now than in 2024, in the 21st century, sadly speaking. And this book has a lot of the right answers, again, focusing on the secular side of it. I'm going to jump into fears, as I said I would, and that's how we're going to conclude this podcast. He talks about the 6 basic fears. And these are what he says. There are 6 basic fears. Every human suffers from some combination of them at one time or another. Anybody that says they have no fears is lying not only to everybody else, but more importantly, they're lying to themselves. We're all humans. We're all sinful by nature. We all have fears. It is the definition of being human. Most people are fortunate if they do not suffer from the entire 6. Named in the order of their most common appearance they are. So these are the 6 fears that he names in the most common appearance. He goes on to say there are more than 6 fears, but these are the most prevalent and the most common in this order. The fear of poverty, the fear of criticism. I would almost turn that one around. The fear of criticism in this day and age with social media and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and everything else, almost the fear of criticism has moved up. Remember, he's writing this in 1937, but I would argue he still stands true to this day that people do have fear of being in poverty. The fear of poverty is number 1. The fear of criticism, number 2. The fear of ill health, the fear of loss of a love of someone, the fear of old age, and the fear of death. If you have the fear of death, you have not listened to the beginning of this podcast, and you have not figured out the most important thing above everything that we've talked about this podcast, salvation, and as I talked at the top of the podcast. So you can write that one right off if you go to the Bible and get rid of death. I have zero fear of death. Zero. If I died today, if I died tomorrow, I know I would be in heaven and I would be the happiest person in the world. But the Lord ultimately decides when we come and when we go. So I have no fear of death. And if that is a fear by which you are plagued, it means you have not discovered the most important thing in life, which again only occurs by grace. So if you don't know what that is, reach out to me and I will fly anywhere, do anything, have as long as a conversation as I need with anybody to talk about salvation and the gift of Christ and get rid of that fear of death. So, rereading those 6 basic fears: the fear of poverty, the fear of criticism, the fear of ill health, the fear of loss of love of someone, the fear of old age, and the fear of death. Now, I highlighted a certain part here, and this is what I'm going to read, and that's where we're going to conclude, because he goes into each one of these fears. We can create nothing that is not first conceived in the form of an impulse of thought. This, again, is playing on the whole point of the book and everything that we have talked about thus far. We can create nothing that is not first conceived in the form of an impulse of thought. Following this statement comes another of still greater importance, namely, thought impulses begin immediately to translate themselves into their physical equivalent whether those thoughts are voluntary or involuntary. And remember, he's talking about this statement in the context of the 6 basic fears. I'm going to reread that again. We can create nothing that is not first conceived in the form of an impulsive thought. Following this statement comes another of still greater importance, namely, thought impulses begin immediately to translate themselves into their physical equivalent, whether those thoughts are voluntary or involuntary. Thought impulses picked up through the ether by mere chance, thoughts released by other minds, may determine one's financial, business, professional, or social destiny just as surely as the thought impulses one creates by intent and design. Wow. You talk about the importance of that statement in today's society when everybody wants likes and everybody wants hearts and everybody wants smiley emojis and everybody's self confidence and personal determination is determined by what other people think about them. You've got to read and internalize not only this statement but the whole book. But think about that. Thought impulses begin immediately to translate themselves into their physical equivalent. What is another way of saying that in today's day and age? What you think, your subconscious mind immediately starts turning them into reality. Period. End of story. Thought impulses begin immediately. They don't wait a day, they don't wait an hour, they begin immediately. Thought impulses begin immediately to translate themselves into their physical equivalent, whether those thoughts are voluntary or involuntary, whether you had those thoughts voluntarily or whether someone else put those thoughts into your mind. Thought impulses picked up through the ether by mere chance, thoughts released by other minds, may determine one's financial, business, professional, or social destiny just as surely as the thought impulses one creates by intent and design. What does that mean? That means that your ability to control the thoughts that occur in your mind is crucial to your ability to be successful or accomplish whatever that goal, number 1 on your card, is. Because if you don't have that, thought impulses immediately begin to turn themselves into the physical equivalent. How many of us have known people with cancer? I've known multiple people. You've likely known multiple people. Have you ever had a scenario where someone is faced with cancer and they are the most positive, optimistic, constructive individual, and there is zero doubt in their mind that they will get better, versus someone who has a demoralized, destructive mindset? I've known both. You've likely known both. And the outcomes, and I know there are studies on this. I don't have one particular one that I can point to you, but I know there are studies on this. The outcome of those with a positive mindset, those who have learned to control their thoughts in a very challenging, difficult situation like that, and that one is directly related to the sixth fear he talks about, the fear of death, and number 3, the fear of unhealthiness or illness. That ability to control your mind is his point. People who have a positive outlook in the face of fear, in the face of a situation like that, being determined to have cancer, you've seen the different outcomes between those who actually believe that they can beat it and their positive mind versus those who can't. The outcomes are astonishing in the difference in those who actually beat it with a positive mind versus those who actually beat it with a negative mind. So if you don't believe that this incredible mind, brain, as sinful as it may be, but created in God's image, can't do incredible things like that, well, you just don't know anything about God's creation. You haven't read this book. And quite frankly, you're hurting yourself. I want to talk about how do you control your mind, because we all have negative thoughts. We all have good days. We all have bad days. And it's not something that just happens overnight. And he addresses that. He's realistic. He understands that in today's day and age, in any day and age, as sinful human beings, there are going to be negative thoughts that enter our mind. And since we know that those immediately begin to act or turn itself into its physical equivalent, how can we control that? He says, mind control is the result of self-discipline and habit. You either control your mind or it controls you. There is no halfway compromise. I'm going to read that again. Mind control is the result of self-discipline, which is hard, and habit, which is also hard. But both can be accomplished in time and with the desire to do so. Those are my added words. Mind control is the self-result of self-discipline, mind control is the result of self-discipline and habit. You either control your mind or it controls you. There is no halfway compromise. The most practical of all methods for controlling the mind is the habit of keeping it busy with a definite purpose backed by a definite plan. Study the record of people who have achieved noteworthy success, and you will observe that they have control over their own minds. Moreover, that they exercise that control and direct it. They exercise that control and direct it toward the attainment of definite objectives. Without this control, success is not possible. Period. If you don't learn how to control your mind, and in this day and age, we have a name for it, EQ, emotional intelligence, I would say. If you don't learn to control your mind, he says, without this control, success is not possible. So you want to talk about people think businesses fail because of monetary reasons. I've always said that's garbage. Businesses fail because of the person running the business. It's always because of the person running the business. The how it manifests itself may be a cash flow issue, and we've seen all the numbers for startups in the first year fail. 70% of startups fail in the first year, 90% of startups fail in the first 3 to 5 years, and everybody says, well, it's monetary. No, it's not. It's this. It's the mind. It starts here. Monetary is simply the manifestation of the failure of our ability to control our mind and the success that comes with that type of control, hands down. Study anybody that's accumulated wealth, study anybody that's lost wealth, and you'll see that that's a huge discrepancy. I'm going to leave or end this podcast with something that I talked about midway through the podcast, and that is something that our society, all of us, particularly in this day and age, are often plagued with, and that is indecision. And this is in the chapter called The Devil's Workshop, the final chapter of the book. Napoleon says, in parting, I would remind you that life is a draughts board. That must be, I'm not even sure what that is, but some type of game, maybe like a darts board. And the player opposite you is time. If you hesitate before moving or neglect to move promptly, your draughts will be wiped off the board by time. You are playing against a partner who will not tolerate indecision. I'm going to read that again. In parting, I would remind you that life is a draughts board, and the player opposite you is time. You are playing against time. If you hesitate before moving or neglect to move promptly, your draughts will be wiped off the board by time. You are playing against a partner who will not tolerate indecision. If you're stuck in neutral and it's because you are not decisive, or you are in a business and you're not sure what decisions to make, and you sit there and you wallow in your own mire, should I not, love me not, you're going to fail. And you know who's going to win in that scenario, as he describes? Time, because you're going to stay mired in a pool of indecisive inaction that will basically prohibit you from being successful. That's not to say make split decisions. That's not to say make foolish, uninformed decisions. But there comes a point, particularly in an entrepreneur or business owner's journey, and you can apply it to whatever particular situation in life you want to apply it to. I'm going to focus on the business owner, the entrepreneur. There comes a point where you are going to have to make decisions without having 100% of the information. That's the risk you take. That's part of the excitement. It's learning, testing, failing, reading, learning from other people. And you don't have to fail on things that people have already failed for. There are certain things you will have to learn for yourself, just as the maturation of life requires, which has happened to me, which happens to any person that ultimately wants to be a successful entrepreneur or business owner. But do not tolerate indecision for yourself. And more importantly, or I would say as importantly, throughout your organization, if you are indecisive, you are creating a culture of indecision, and that will ultimately destroy whatever company you are trying to determine, because you are fighting against time, secularly speaking, and time is the other player on that checkerboard or the darts board. And if you aren't sure where to put your darts and you don't throw them, he will throw all of his and hit the bullseye, and you will be wiped off and you will be gone. Do not forget you are playing against a partner who does not tolerate indecision. And he goes on to talk about the importance of decisiveness and how that is one of the steps to riches, one of the 13 steps to riches. And we just can't cover it all. Think and Grow Rich, the landmark bestseller, now revised and updated for the 21st century, Napoleon Hill. Look at my show notes. Click on the link in the show notes. It will take you to Amazon to get the book. You will be supporting the podcast at the same time as you will be buying one of the most important personal development books you will ever get. That's all the time that we have for today's podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, And I look forward to hearing from you, whether on YouTube comments, whether on the podcast comments, or whether on Twitter, your experience and your thoughts with the book. Thanks so much. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next Wednesday.
Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing to and liking our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, and by following and liking the show on your favorite audio platforms. Be sure to connect with us on X, formerly Twitter, A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast, so you can interact with Andrew, the team, and our guests throughout the week. Thank you again so much for listening. Have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.